You might think that everybody wants wealth, but there are two common objections I get to sustainable wealth secrets that I'd like to share with you today because, frankly, they're just silly. I'm Justin Hitt with Sustainable Wealth Secrets, where we help high-income professionals transform their earnings into long-term, measurable prosperity. And the two biggest objections I get is, one, the amount of work it takes to track and manage your money, and number two, the basically asking you to live far below your means. So number one, it does require some effort to track and maintain accurate records and to manage your investments and such. Even if you hire an outsider to manage your investments, you still need to make sure that they're doing the work that you've hired them for, that they're actually earning you money above and beyond the commissions you're paying. And I think it's just a horrible excuse when people say, well, it sounds like a lot of work. So regular bookkeeping sounds like a lot of work. Knowing where your money went, tracking your investments to make sure you're actually making money. These are functions that all highly successful and wealthy people have in place. Now, you will get to a certain income where you can hire a part-time person to do this. Now, I've had a part-time and even a full-time bookkeeper managing rental properties, business, personal finances, doing all just the entry and bookkeeping and sorting bills. Because when you do have 10 or 15 bank accounts or 10 or 15 financial institutions that you're working with, it can be like a part-time job, and you really don't want it to be. Ultimately, there are systems that will help you better manage your money so that the money becomes more of a utility tool than something you're earning or something you're chasing after. There's also, from the career perspective, that managing your career is a contributing factor to manage your incomes. So, for example, if you go work for a company that's paying you below market wages, then you're underutilizing your skill and you're ultimately not earning the money that gives you the potential to build wealth and security. If you're not working with your tax attorney or CPA, and folks, if you're at $100,000 a year, you need to be having a CPA do your taxes, and you need to start talking about structure, because $100,000 a year isn't really a lot of money. If depending on where you live, you could be at like barely able to pay your bills if you lived in New York. There was a criticism of one of these executives had a $2 million house, but if you look at their neighborhood, everybody's got $2 million houses. Not only that, they're so close to a city that has $5 and $10 million houses that they're actually living in the suburbs, and their home is basically financed completely. They're basically renting out of proximity to their office location because even though they bought the house. Because ultimately there isn't equity in that house. It's like a $2 million house with $1.5 million loan. The ratios just aren't there, and then it puts them at risk, just like somebody who maybe bought a $40,000 house and paid cash for it. Ultimately, what you're looking at is there is some effort required, and if you believe this effort is an obstacle, then it's likely you're not approaching it the right way. When it comes to your wealth, there are different types of retirement accounts. You're probably going to use 2 or 3 different types of accounts. Depending on your income level, when you start getting about $200,000 a year, $250,000 a year, you may not qualify for the accounts that you hear everybody talking about, and you might have to go look for different types of accounts. You might have to use insurance product, or you may have to use your 401k differently. You must invest in knowing these things. Otherwise, you're just going to be like the masses, and you're going to live paycheck to paycheck, and you're always going to struggle. Now, one thing, which is a second objective, that can stop the paycheck to paycheck is if you live significantly below your means. But that is that's a language term I use to get your attention. The fact of the matter is, what is your means? Now, of course, because a lot of people think it takes a lot of time and effort to manage their money, they don't actually know what their means are. They don't know what their base expenses are. They don't know what discretionary expenses versus mandatory expenses. They might not even be aware of the debt load that they have of fixed rate loans versus loans that might be changing in minimum payment, or the minimum payment's actually artificially low, like a lot of credit cards. They don't know what their total repayment schedule is. So how do they know what their means is so they can live below their means? See, most people default to whatever it says in the paycheck. That's how much they can spend. But when you have the mindset shift that comes with sustainable wealth of living off of the proceeds of your investments, this is very important. It's an entirely different world. You're essentially creating an endowment for yourself and then living off the proceeds of the endowment rather than your income. And this is extremely powerful because if you're in a situation, I was explaining this to my son who was smart enough to ask the question, if you're a kid making $5,000 a year, you have little or no expenses, and you're able to save 50% of what you receive. Because I'm assuming there might be some taxes eventually, but you're able to save 50% of what you're receiving as your net earnings. Every year, even a kid can figure this out. 12-year-old can figure this out. Every year you work, you're now saving a year's worth of expenses. Think about this. Kid's making $5,000 a year. He saves $2,500 a year, spends the other $2,500. Okay? And I'm assuming these are necessary expenses. Okay? For every year they work, they set aside another year's worth of expenses. See, that's sustainable wealth. That's where we get started from. Now, the next year they make $10,000, but their expenses stay the same. They could, like most people, expand their expenses. Well, I got a little extra money. I got that raise. I can finally get that boat I've been looking for. Oh, I could get a bunch of toys and a bunch of things. I explained this as a kid, by the way, because kids are just like adults are just like kids in a lot of places where if they get a little extra money, they spend a little extra money. But if you live far within your means, meaning you spend your resources as they need to be allocated rather than as you desire them to be allocated. So, for example, you pay your mortgages first, you pay your debt, you pay yourself first, but then you pay your mortgages and your debt. You pay, you get all your household expenses taken care of, and then when all of that's done, then you are done with your expenses because when you paid yourself first, you paid yourself every possible penny that was available beyond the required expenses. Now, this is very important, folks. I know a family that hasn't made more than $45,000 a year in today's dollars. They've had 2 people working. They have always worked jobs that they enjoy. They have seriously never made that much money, never made more than average, yet they own large tracts of property. They vacation 4 months out of the year. Okay, this was before they retired. When they retire now, they just do whatever the hell they want. In fact, they still work because they enjoy their jobs. But ultimately, what they were doing, and they explained it to me, is that every penny of their paycheck went into their investment account. Every time. 100% in the investment account. And then they expensed their day-to-day living based on the interest of that investment account. Now, in the beginning, it was savings bonds. In the beginning, it was treasuries. In the beginning, it was just basic investments. They eventually, I don't think he ever traded stock or anything like that, but eventually they moved along to index funds and mutual funds, and they received the dividends at home. So they direct deposit their entire paycheck into their investment account, managed it in a balanced portfolio, received the dividend checks at home. Okay, now eventually they just did regular scheduled transfers, and they lived off of the dividend checks of their investments. Now think about that. This little country boy, he don't know nothing, and he's taking the dividend checks and buying land. And, of course, they're covering their expenses, and they live very modestly. They have a nice home, but it's not big. The kids' had bunk beds. But at this point now, they've sold the land to their kids. Okay, so they bought the land cheap, held it in trust for their kids. The kids decided they wanted the land. They sold it at market rate to the kids and then cashed out of the land. Now, they've been doing things with the land before they got to that point, so I don't know their exact tax position, but their earnings were never very much. In fact, on their tax returns, I did help with their tax return one time because we were talking about this topic, and they were showing me how they work their adjusted gross income. And this is a friend of the family. They weren't a client or anything. But ultimately, they taught me a very important lesson. They paid themselves first, and they lived off of the proceeds of their investments. How long do you think they can go in a bad economy without work or in any other situation? Well, they can go indefinitely. Now, there aren't these vacations they're taking. They like to go to Branson. They like to go do river cruises. They're not going to extravagant mansions and things. They're not paying for their entire family to go on a vacation. If the rest of the family wants to vacation with them, they have their family pay their own way. But don't you think their kids now have the skills to not only pay their own way, but to get everything out of life that they want? And have a safety net, not relying on the government, not relying on somebody else. But again, it has to go down with knowing that, yeah, I got a salary of $100,000, but I'm only bringing in $20,000 a year. And that $100,000 is going into account. See, if you can't do it with small money, and that's why I'm teaching my kid, then you won't do it with big money. But here's the point. They stayed debt-free. They focused on what they could afford. They artificially restricted their earnings. And guess what? They don't give a damn what the Joneses are doing. Not only that, they laugh at the Joneses sometimes. They do have some cool cars, but they're driving around in these classic vehicles that need a little bit of work here and there, but they're good, reliable vehicles. And the neighbor's coming over and saying, "Look at this new truck I got, $40,000, new truck." And he's like, "That's a nice truck," but points to his old beater that he uses for rough work, because this new guy can't use his nice truck for rough work. And the beater was $5,000 plus maybe $1,000 a year in maintenance. Do you see where I'm coming from, folks? If you're willing to invest the time to measure and count and track your money and to be a good steward of the blessings that you've received, which is your earnings, your means, and even go as far as put aside for your future self, because that's really what you're doing when you live far within your means. You're not sacrificing anything. You're extremely selfish to spend far less than you earn, because that means you're going to stand up for yourself, you're going to be able to provide for yourself, and you're going to be independent now and into the future. In fact, I would argue that it's extremely greedy for you to live beyond your means, because now you're relying on the goodwill of other people's money. And whether you're borrowing the money, which is taxing your future self, or you're receiving the money in benefits programs because you're desperate, I would say that that's greedy. But the real responsible person, the person who determines how much they need to have a comfortable life, and by the way, I might look cheap. I might be wearing clothes from Goodwill. I might be in a situation where I don't look like I've got means. But when a sewer line failed at my house, I just paid cash. And you might be saying, well, Justin, if you lived in a newer house, you wouldn't have a sewer line failure. That's BS. That's BS. I got a house as big as this $2 million. So this senior executive, we were talking, they got this $2 million house. They're describing the $2 million house. And I said, well, I got a house just as big. And my house is a little bit newer. And my house is only $155,000. And see, this working remote has really triggered in a lot of people's heads that, you know what? I don't need to be up with the Joneses. A lot of these luxuries are not luxuries. Sitting in traffic for 2 hours a day is not a luxury. Having to jump on a metro and then go and take 45 minutes to get into the office, walk 4 blocks, that's not a luxury. Me getting out of bed, walking downstairs and working on a computer, working for a major Fortune 100 company, that's luxury. Being able to go out in my backyard, spend time and eat dinner with my family, being able to take a walk with the dog during lunch, that's luxury. And it's made possible by, again, living far within your means. And that's just it's a misnomer, because your means is expressing that you could possibly spend more. But if you're going to take care of your current self and your future self, then you can't spend that much. And it's not a restriction. It's not a diet. It's not you're punishing yourself. It is being a good steward of the blessings you've received, setting aside for the future, preparing now for the inevitable, and positioning yourself for sustainable wealth. Now, there will be a point, and to be honest, there is a point where your investments are spinning off so much money that you can increase your standard of living. I do know a number of people, for example, the family that I talked about, they take 4 months of vacations every year. Do they really need 4 months of vacation? They used to take just 2 months of vacation, but now they've got grandbabies, so they want to go. Some of these vacations, they're actually traveling the country to visit their grandkids. And they've also got to visit many historical sites. And sometimes they're just, like a half-week vacation. But they're not staying in the Ritz-Carlton. Now, they probably could afford to stay in a Ritz-Carlton. But their lifestyle preference is long-term sustainability, not short-term excitement. Now, they do once or twice a year go someplace that's pretty awesome. Where, if they even bothered with social media, everybody would be jealous. But the majority of the time, they're building experiences. They're connecting with family. They're doing things that they want to do. They're putting themselves in positions where they can do so, again, by the measuring, investing, and distribution of their means in a reasonable way that takes care of both their current self and their future self. I'm Justin Hitt with Sustainable Wealth Secrets. If anything I covered was not clear, because with these podcasts, it's sometimes difficult to convey an idea or concept, and you'd like to see diagrams or you'd like to see, the cash flow breakout, that's fine. Contact my offices via www.sustainablewealthsecrets.com. I'm dedicated to help you gain wealth that cannot be taken away. You're not going to lose that wealth in the economy. You're not going to lose that wealth through taxation. You're not going to lose that wealth through scams or other types of schemes that are very often targeted at high-income professionals. You're going to be in a position where you can have and do all that you want. Now, again, though, the common response to that is, but it's going to be a lot of paperwork. But it's gonna mean I can't spend the money that I earn. And I hope I've blown those out of the water, because those are keeping you back from being in a position of complete independence. Imagine being able to just simply get up and do whatever the hell you want without having to ask permission, without having to save up the money. It's just like, it's a natural part of your everyday. I could go on about this for 2 days. Again, if you have any questions, contact me. If you have a specific situation where you'd like to engage in consultation, if you qualify, we could do a paid consultation. But ultimately, folks, I'm Justin Hitt with Sustainable Wealth Secrets. Thanks for listening.